Welcome to DIF 2018, the online festival that talks about new ideas, new innovations that can redesign everything. Today we're going to talk about remanufacturing in building products. Many of us are living in cities, and without necessarily knowing, we consume our finite material resources in building products like facades, ventilation, lighting, things that heat the building. So during this session, you can get involved by asking your questions, posing your comments. There is a comment box next to this video on the session page on thinkdiff.co, but you can also use social media and then use the hashtag thinkdiff. It's going to be quite a busy one. We have 6 guests calling all in from the Netherlands, and therefore I would quickly like to give word to our first speaker, David Peck. Welcome.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much. Dave Peck here from Delft University of Technology. I'll go straight in. I'm going to talk a little bit of an introduction to remanufacturing. Obviously, it's the topic today, and remanufacturing in the built environment. I think it's really exciting because there's been quite a bit of work already done on remanufacturing. A lot of that is focused on automotive historically. We've been looking for new areas, which I'll talk about in a moment in more depth. But the built environment, actually, where a lot of the impact in terms of materials and waste and energy, it's a really exciting space. We'll all go through some examples, but I'll kick off with a basic introduction to what we're talking about. So first of all, the first slide will help us get the concept here. Now, I've done a really naughty thing here, and forgive me, Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I've chopped your butterfly diagram in half. Of course, I don't ignore the bio side of the butterfly diagram, but it just helps a little bit. We tend in remanufacturing to be a little bit more focused on the techno cycles. Of course, it's exciting when we bring in the biocycles as well. But let's just go with this for the second. So we tend, well, in my work anyway, I tend to see there's 2 sets of cycles going on here. The first 3, the sharing, the reusing, the remanufacturing, refurbishing, they're all product life extension strategies. That makes stuff cycle longer. The final one is the recycling. That's the material reuse. And that's the only loop that will put materials back in. Although, of course, all the other product life extensions should eventually put materials back in as well. That's the final and last option. But it's the third one out, the refurbish, remanufacture, and we're focusing on remanufacture, and I'll show you the difference as we go through. If we have a look at my next slide. Here we go. This is where we're now getting into some detail. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of different language used around the re's. And they're widely misunderstood, and there's probably more re's. By re's, I mean reuse, remanufacture, repair. So there's a lot more than on this list, but let's just have a quick glance at some of these in this list. And of course, these go out further out in the as shown in the butterfly diagram, further outwards. The point I'm trying to highlight here is remanufacture is the only that will bring a product or a piece of equipment back to its original condition or better than its original condition.
What we see here on this slide is that remanufacture, rebuild, the letters are quite small. Can you...
Yeah, I'll go through them. Yeah, it's okay. So if we take that full column on one side, have we zoomed in a little bit here for you? Excellent. So now you can see it. So now let's just pick up here. So we're picking up here from at the bottom: repair, renovate, refurbish. And you see it says lower or equivalent. And this is the standard of the product or the equipment as you go through. Reconstruct, recondition, rebuild. These words are all used in different companies and different organizations. When we look at remanufacturing at the top there, as I said already, it's equivalent or better than its original standard. We've had some nice projects together in collaboration with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as well. So if I go on to the next slide. So one we had that was supported by the European Union was called a European Remanufacturing Network. And one of the outcomes of that was to establish the Council for Remanufacturing, which I was really happy to read. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has now made an associate partner, I think, of some sort or another, and so got a sort of formalized CE 100, and the Council of Remanufacturing have partnered up, which is fantastic news. What we did there is we were looking, as we said already, that Remans is better in-box with warranty. And this means that the product would have gone through a manufacturing style process. So a used product from service will come back into a facility, be cleaned, stripped down, cleaned, individual parts cleaned, tested. Where things need to be replaced, they can be replaced, but you try and use again as much as you did before. Reassembled, tested, in box as new with a warranty. So, and the user, the person who gets it afterwards, shouldn't be able to tell a new, in other words, first time manufactured, and a remanufactured product apart. They're as good, if not better than the new part. And we saw in this project as well, a lot of jobs and high skill can be created. We in this project were focused on Europe, but we're partnered with the CE 100 the Pioneer University partner, Rochester Institute of Technology in the United States, has a specialism on this as well. And we see companies shifting their stance. If we move to the next slide. So what are they saying? This organization, as I've said already, partnering with the CE 100 in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They aim to bring business from every sector together, and they want to triple it from in Europe to 100 billion by 2030. We think that's quite conservative. We think it'll be way bigger than that. So the opportunity is enormous, and especially once we get into the built environment sector, things move with big numbers really fast. So next slide is one. So that's me finished. I've just sort of gone through, giving you a little introduction. But my fellow speakers will go in a little bit more in depth. And in that, I hand over to Juan.
Thank you, Dave. So yeah, Juan Azcárate. I'm a PhD researcher here at TU Delft. And today I will be talking about an ongoing project that we have, which is called facade leasing. Yeah, I mean, probably not everyone knows what a facade is. Basically, the facade is the building envelope or the skin of the building. And well, what it does is it separates the interior of the building from the exterior. And we decided to focus on this because, well, it has a very big impact on the energy performance of the building, and also has a huge impact on the initial cost of the building or the cost of renovating a building. It might be between 20 and 40% of the cost of a building is probably in the facade and the building services that keeps the building climatized and the energy performance going. And what we saw is that if we wanted to create incentives for remanufacturing and also for energy performance renovations, we had to shift the way in which the economy around building products works. So we see that in facades or in any other building products, we have this linear system in which manufacturers just deliver a facade or any other building product like radiators or air conditioning systems or whatever else. And then the clients are responsible for all the ongoing operations that are needed to keep the equipment going. And this can mean that they have to invest more cash during time, monitor the equipment, dispose of the equipment, repair it, and so on. And what we wanted to do was instead shift this towards a circular system in which the manufacturer becomes a service provider who is in charge of all the ongoing long-term activities that are needed to have the equipment performing. And then the client basically only pays a certain fee, which is based on the performance. In the case of the facade, this performance can be user satisfaction, energy consumption of the building, to have, let's say, operable windows and solar shading that operate at the right time and that don't break. They might even be automated. And well, the idea is that by shifting all this responsibility to the manufacturer, who is also the party with the most technical expertise, let's say, you also make it more likely that this company, which retains ownership of the facade, will also remanufacture the components in the end.
Juan, how long does a facade normally last?
Well, facades last easily between 25 and, let's say, even 70 years, depending on the components. We have, let's say, more building service components like ventilation systems, PVs, and so on. They can last about 20, 25 years, while the glazing and the aluminum framing can last between 50 and 70 years. So it's already things that last a very long time, but right now we have a huge number of buildings that were built in the 50s to 70s, and which have to be renovated. Maybe some estimates put it at over 50% of the European building stock that has to be renovated soon. So this means that we really have to find a way of renovating it in a circular way. Otherwise, yeah, we have a huge challenge ahead of us. And so basically what this project looks into is that it's not only about how to design a product that can be remanufactured, let's say that is easy to disassemble, easy to break apart and to have the components cleaned and reused. But it's also about how we organize everything around the supply chain. So how clients make decisions, how suppliers deliver their products and their services, also how to access finance from banks and others, and also how the policy allows these kind of contracts to be organized, let's say. And yeah, I mean, that's what I want to focus on now, not only about a circular design of products,
Sorry,
but products never work in a
little bit. Could you say that sentence again?
Sorry?
Your audio dropped out.
Oh, sorry.
Could you say that last bit again? Just
oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have a bit of an audio problem. Yeah, I think the bottom line of the research project so far is that it's not only about designing a product that will be circular and easy to recover and remanufacture. It's really about how to design a whole systemic environment that allows this to happen. We often see products that were designed with very good circular remanufacturing intentions, but then if they just reach a market in which the incentives are not right, then many of these design intents will not really translate into, actual remanufactured components, let's say. And I think with that, I want to pass over to David.
Yeah, we're going to bring Ellen in a second. Is it worth reminding the viewers that they can come into the group to pose questions at any point, and we'll pick them up because we'll have a discussion at the end?
Yeah, definitely. So if people online want to join this discussion, you can ask the questions on thinkdiff.co. My colleague will have an eye out and he'll post the questions to us so we can so we know what questions are being asked and we can put them in to the group discussion.
Cool. Perfect. We turn to Ellen.
Okay, thank you, David. My name is Ellen van Buren, Professor of Urban Development Management, also at Delft University of Technology. And I would like to share some insights with you on urban mining, which is also in essence requires some systematic changes like the ones Juan pointed at. So urban mining, if you can bring in my first slide, it is a simple message in essence. So it suggests to look upon our cities as a mine of materials, of building products, building components, which can be reused. As we heard, there are many projects or many buildings and homes needing refurbishment in the coming years, and also many buildings that will reach their end of life in the years to come. So what we could do is, of course, take them apart carefully and reuse many of these materials and components. But to what extent is this really an opportunity? We've taken a look at Amsterdam as a potential urban mine, and my next slide shows what this will look like for two specific metals. So on the left-hand side, you see the copper that is present in the city of Amsterdam, and on the right-hand side, in the red colors, you see the steel in our present buildings. And it is based on an estimation of the quantities of copper and steel used in buildings. And we sort of roughly estimated the content of these metals in the buildings based on the building age and the building style. And these are very rough estimates, but it already gives you an idea of how much material wealth is present in our built environment. So there will be a very huge benefit to have an idea of all sorts of materials, what's out there, if you want to reuse them. And it allows us to have this information, allows us to plan for reuse. But as my next slide shows, reality is a bit more complex than that. So it's not that easy to reuse all the materials that would come available. And I just mentioned a few of the potential barriers. First of all, there's a lack of reliable information. So when do you know what materials are there and what quantities? Second, there's the uncertainty of availability. When will they become available? You never know for sure when projects will be demolished or when they will be refurbished and come out for reuse. A third challenge is the matching of supply and demand. Will you have, when you've got a plan for new constructions, will you have enough materials available to build these new buildings from? Another element of concern is the preservation of the quality of the materials and the control of it. And when do you know when, because buildings, of course, safety and security, not just from a risk point of view, but also from a liability point of view, are very pressing demands for our building construction industry. So how to make sure that the quality is there, that the quality meets our norms and standards, and these norms and standards are regularly updated as well. So when buildings and infrastructures, when they've been constructed in the past based on previous regulations, previous norms and standards, will they be still up to date, and can you just reuse them? And last but not least, there is a concern of the intervention of with other supply chains. For example, our construction and demolition waste, especially the concrete that we crush, tends to be used as a basis for road construction. And this road construction industry is very pleased with having such a cheap input for their road construction. So you intervene in other supply chains, which makes it a bit more challenging to coordinate as well. So these were my slides showing these complexities. But what can we learn from this? To what extent is this? We can get rid of the slides now. What use is it to think of cities as an urban mine when we have so much challenges to consider as well? Well, first of all, it is a very inspiring thought because it challenges us to think also when designing our buildings and constructions and infrastructures, to think of it from an end-of-life point of view as well. And how can we design for reuse and design in such a high quality as possible, and to design for return logistics as well, and how to get all these materials back and to make them applicable for reuse as well. How to involve other sectors in this design for recycling and reuse. And how to understand the incentives that may block or support our reuse. And when we think of material components and building components at present, and we look at the price structure, there are still few incentives at present to reuse materials and building components, because the virgin use of materials is still much cheaper in many cases. So then we come up with the question of, well, how can we intervene then? How can we change this incentive structure? And then we have to look at private industry, but also at governments to put policies in place that may support us to deliver these incentive structures. And we can think, for example, of procurement policies of governments, procurement policies for land, for buildings and products. We can also think of environmental policies, again, for buildings, but also for the building process. Construction separate separate collection of demolition waste, so it will be easier to reuse and remanufacture. But also the building permits might be used to put in controls for urban mining and the reuse of components. And of course, you always talk about specific sites and specific places, specific cities. So there is always a local context that needs to be taken into consideration. So to sum up, from the point of view of urban mining, it sheds a light on how can we perceive the planning and construction of our cities from a reuse point of view, and can we potentially reuse all the materials that come out of these cities when we improve them? Can we also extend, if we think of not just the materials that come available, but also for many of the interventions that will come up in cities, it might be good to think of it from this point of view as well. If we think of the energy transition and all the energy renovations that need to be carried out in the present building stock, we really need to think about the material intensity and the materials becoming available from all these energy renovations as well. This is a dimension that is often forgotten in all these other changes that cities need to make. So prospecting cities as urban mines, yeah, it really helps us to understand the material consequences of future urban development. And this is what I would have liked to share with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ellen. This is, I hope that's given lots of people plenty to think about. And now we move to our next contributor, dear colleague of mine, Nina Boersma is going to come in from Industrial Design Engineering and talk a little bit about remanufacturing and product design. Nina.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you, David. I'm a PhD researcher, just like Juan. We're in different faculties. So Juan is in the Faculty of Architecture. I'm from the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering. And I was hoping to shed some light on the remanufacturing of products, actually, which is already which is being done for a long time, for decades already. And it would be interesting to see where the built environment can learn and from how it's done, how remanufacturing is done in the product industry, and the other way around. So let's see if there's some interesting things here. At first, so I want to give an impression about how does remanufacturing work when it comes to products, and I will do that by going over 3 things. Let's share my slide here. Yeah, so I will do this in 3 sections. In the first one, I would like to go a little bit more in detail about this remanufacturing process, because this actually determines also which products are easier and harder to remanufacture. The second one is I want to give a couple examples of the markets and the type of products which are being remanufactured right now. And then I want to conclude with some enablers which I have seen that really drive companies to pick up these strategies. So firstly, to go through a couple of the operation steps which you see in remanufacturing. So there's a first and very important one is actually how do you select which products you are actually going to put input in your remanufacturing operations. So, you know, you have a lot of products. Some might be harder to reach from your clients. Some might be more difficult to reach. And then you have the very old products, a little bit like medium old. You have different types of products. So how are you going to make a selection? This is very important because this determines how effective you can work during your remanufacturing operations. And then the second step is product disassembly. So this is actually a key enabler for remanufacturing, because you should be able to take your products apart to get them in the original state again. Also for disassembly, it's not only important that you can take apart the products, it's also very important when looking at the lifetime of the different parts. How do you build them up in your product? Because those parts which tend to wear out or get outdated quickly, you want them actually within close reach. Let's say you want to be able to take them out within a certain time frame and maybe replace them, or as you see in the product step replacement, you might even want to have an upgrade in case legislation allows this, of course. So here you have some different some steps. I will not go over all of them. I would like to move towards the markets. So of course we have the B2B markets and the C2C markets, but what we see is a lot more product remanufacturing happening in the B2B markets. And this is often because either the products themselves are very valuable, there's a lot of valuable materials, but sometimes also very valuable technologies inside. So you might have a big product and there's a couple of highly valuable parts in it, just like with the medical devices, where you have the X-ray beam and the detector of X-ray, which are very valuable and are very interesting for companies to get back. Other examples are, like David already said, engines. Automotive industry does this on a very big scale already. Not only with engines, but there are a lot of other car parts which are being remanufactured. You have robots, for example, for production lines. And for the Dutch people, we have an example which is very close to home, which are the bikes, the public transport bikes, which we have at all of our stations. These bikes are actually also at end of the use life of these bikes, they are taken back and they are being remanufactured, and you can recognize them from the green label you have on these bikes. And then I want to quickly move on to the enablers. I'm looking at the time. So key enablers which I found are actually that you want to start with a big volume of parts. Let me switch back to my camera. Yeah. So one of the things is that you really want to make sure you have enough volume, you have enough product returns in order to start off this remanufacturing process. And this, of course, comes together with it. You need the demand for all these products you remanufacture. So it's really a game of making sure enough product is coming in, and on the other hand, you have enough demand for people to buy them. As I said, the product needs to be disassemblable, but not only disassemblable, it is important that after you did this, you're able to put it back together again. So you should be able to reassemble it as well. Like I said, with the products in business-to-business markets, there should be enough value in a product for you to go through this quite relatively expensive remanufacturing process, because partly it can be standardized, but still there's a lot of labor and there's a lot of investments on that side. And actually for remanufactured products, it is often it's a benefit when the technology of a product already has stabled out. So there's not so many changes happening and not so many innovations. So that means that a product keeps on being relevant over a longer period of time. So this is actually what I wanted to share with you guys. So a little bit about the remanufacturing operations and what does it mean for design. Something about the markets. I forgot to mention that there's not so many products in the business to consumer markets yet. And then the enablers of remanufacturing.
And a quick question, Nina, why are there not that many products yet, business to consumer?
In business to consumer, you often see that these products are smaller, have less value, and they are much harder to get back because you need to reach out all these different households actually where you have these products lying around. So it becomes a very time-consuming activity actually. So those are the main things. And yeah, then I would like to give the word to the next speaker, to Remco.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Yeah, Remco, please come in and tell us, Remco from Bricks Foundation is going to tell us something about flexible circular buildings.
Thank you very much for participating and your kind introduction. Yes, flexible buildings is actually about the concept of who is the client of a building. And actually, what I discovered is that we have two fundamental different clients into buildings. And actually, the one is, like we all do, living or working in a building. And the other client is actually using the building as the business, like we have when we develop cities in our society. So we rent out a building. And it also means that building as a service in itself is not circular yet. So what we actually have to do is find a way of addressing to different clients into a business model, which is absolutely not an easy task when I look at how the world performs this. Let me show you how that works. Basically, when I look at the model, you see in the middle left the developer of a building actually owning a piece of land, willing to create a building, and of course having an end user in mind. But the proper development takes roughly 5 to 10 years, and there's hardly any specific end user already in the picture, especially not if you want to rent a place as an end user. So we end up having a big problem in time. And what we actually see, that what I discovered in the middle of the picture, that I put in two lines of creating parts of a building. One in line of the construction of the building and the facade of the building, basically catering the long-term perspective of the developer, the owner. And the fit out, the actual fitting around the end user, that is a much shorter lifespan and also has a much more widely and changeable way of looking at how you want to work, how you want to live. And of course, there are completely different materials being used in both aspects. And actually, we have a lot of buildings already supporting this. And one of the projects that I like that it's actually showing this is this project in Helsinki that basically shows you on the top how 8 different homes are made on a proper one-to-one consumer base. But at the bottom, you see from both ends how an actual home unit is put available. In this case, a 2-story unit. You see the horizontal line where you can make a floor. So every end user is basically making their personal home in a framework of, in this case, a 10-story apartment building. And within this separation, you also see that there are different materials being used. When you look at remanufacturing, sure, we can focus at the facades, for instance, where in the long-term use from an investment point of view, you want to update your building and keep it into maybe even hundreds of years. When you look at the end user point of view, you want to adapt to the changes in your family. You want to, if the kids are in or the kids are out, you want to spend a week or more just to change your home. But everything that comes available, especially when we talk about the service systems, they have a very long perspective as a product, but not as used from the point of view of the end user. So there are a lot of options, especially now when we go to sustainable energy. We get more and more technology into homes, ICT, connected to the internet, etc., giving huge opportunities to go on and on and on. So what we actually need to do is find a way of making this separation into two circles of materials and products into buildings as the new way of looking at buildings, because we still see a building as a one-off. And actually, when you look in time, it's absolutely not. And actually, buildings that are difficult to change are the first to be demolished. And from a point of view of a developer, you're very much looking into durability as the basic ingredient of your assets. About 10% of the world value is put into real estate. So mind you, this is huge. But when you look at the home user or offices or in other areas, especially shops, you see that the actual end user is becoming more and more specific, more and more focused on quality and direct access to facilitate to their change. So what I actually want to show you is a model of how this looks when you really go into the depth of the real estate and construction industry. And that's, I guess, the main challenge. It's a complex world. You see, there are a lot of partners now working together. And what I did here is, when I developed this a few years ago, let's put the customer in the center. Whether it's the end user, whether it's the investor, put it in the center. Have a few people that really assist in their lifespan, putting the materials and the products around it with all the value, and putting the actual advisor, consultancy, and the finance at the outside. So you can get a much more systematic approach, so you can facilitate in the long run any end user, any investor, and doing that, making sure that we facilitate change, but from the perspective of both fundamentally different clients. So that's actually what I wanted to show you. And if you want to know more, feel free to read some of the books that I've been publishing about. You can download them for free. And also the ETH Zurich paper shows you more in depth the different aspects that are helping you to get a grip on the fundamental impact this splitting of the base building and the fit out has on the industry, but also especially, I would say, on clients and sustainability. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks a lot, Remco. Very interesting. We actually have a question coming through on Twitter. And the question is around flexible housing, but not in terms of having one owner, like the user or the investor, as you said before, but something that we also have seen in articles from the foundation is that some buildings are only used for such a small period of time throughout its at normal use. Did you also look into that with flexible buildings, like multiple uses for one building?
Well, especially also when a building has a very short lifespan, it's natural not to look on durability, but to focus on sustainability. And not for the actual building on that site, but look at how buildings then can be reused all over. That's basically what we do in temporary buildings, whether homes, but especially schools and shops, during renovation, during construction. They're basically dismantled, replaced on a different place. What my main focus is on is actually the building in cities. And especially when you talk about high rises, we're getting more and more dense in the way we populate ourselves. Cities are growing. And the fundamental problem of change in the city from the perspective of the end user is now in a sort of split incentive fight with the actual owner. And the split incentive, which is actually a conflict of interest between the two types of clients, exists worldwide. And I believe the only way to solve this is actually to avoid it, to keep them both at place. And it has the ability that every product you literally get out of a home because there's a change of family, because somebody else is going to live there, can easily be dismantled. And I've visited projects in Japan that is really now based on this developed knowledge from the Netherlands, that they don't use any screws anymore. Everything is not even glued together. It is really put together without any further physical connection. And therefore, dismantling is becoming easier and easier and easier. And reuse is also becoming easier and easier. And even with those concepts, it's not so much the value that is avoiding reuse, it's the easiness that makes it possible.
All right, thanks a lot. So we're going into I think a quick discussion round because we don't have that much time left. But we'll pick a few questions out from thinkdiff.co. So if you still have any questions, do send them through. You're still in time. One that we have from Eric on the website, and it didn't specify to whom this question is, so I'll leave it up to the speakers to answer it. Some products might be better prospects than others, I assume. Do you have any examples, and why are those more suitable for remanufacturing?
That's either Nina, perhaps. Have you got any thoughts on that, Nina? I have.
Why some products have a better fit with reman than others?
Yeah.
Yeah, from a product design point of view, definitely. There are some big differences for why some products are easier to remanufacture than others. And I guess it also has to do with, is there a market for the product you want to remanufacture? So if there is a specific demand for a remanufactured product, or for example, if this product, when you would buy it as a new product, would be very expensive, like some construction machinery tool or equipment, then it is very interesting for a customer to look at a remanufactured product of which the specifications is as good as new. So yeah, this would be my main point, actually. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to add something to this.
Yeah, there's possibly something also to do with the materials involved. So the value, again, it's supporting your point about the economic aspects. But the higher value materials, sometimes that can have an effect. But as you say, how things are put together. So if it's a smaller product and it's all glued and bonded and it's just going to be a nightmare getting it to pieces to do remanufacturing, by the time you've replaced everything, it's just not worth it. Yeah. Also to do with the value of the product. So I know you looked at CAT scanners in the medical device industry, and that's quite a different thing from looking at a small pump in a building or something like that, the value of the product. But Ellen wants to say something.
Yes, I think also, Nina, you already raised it, the volume of the availability of the product to be remanufactured is of course an issue as well. And we also see it on the level of buildings when you want to reuse demolished building components. You need to have new designs in place as well in which you can reuse them. So in the Netherlands, for example, on this level, we look at housing corporations because they've got large portfolios of buildings which need to be renovated or demolished and rebuilt, which makes it easier to match this supply and demand of building materials and components and products to be reused.
And something that we've heard on the DIF before is safe and circular. So not just knowing what materials there are in products, but also knowing whether they are safe for us as humans as well. How is this linked with building products? Is that a big problem at the moment?
I'm going to jump in here because it's something I feel really strongly about, and this is something for one, especially on the facade side of things. So we've seen the disaster in Grenfell Tower in London, and that's not, they weren't remanufactured or reused facade panels. But it worries me greatly that we don't misstep and reuse materials, remanufacture things, which are then going to cause, for instance, a fire disaster or a structural disaster.
So I'm just quickly going to step in for everybody online watching that doesn't know about the towers.
Yeah, there was a big fire. If you didn't see it on the news, you need to check it out. There was a big fire in a tower block in London, and 70, I think, people were killed. And a great disaster so anywhere in Europe, we really felt it. And our hearts go out to the families involved. But I think this is the big importance of having experts and colleagues around who are structural engineers, who are designers, who understand building regulations and what needs to be done. Also, we may need to change some building regulations. I think that came up definitely in some of the presentations. And if we change things, we always have to really think through what could be an unforeseen outcome, and we can do that. So I don't see it as it's a challenge, but it's not an impossible barrier to overcome.
May I add on that?
Yes.
One of the essence that I found out when people are able to fill in their own home is that they actually can put their own ambition on health into their home by choosing materials that for others might be too expensive or irrelevant from a health point of view, but for them are crucial. And as there are a lot of people with allergies, that doesn't mean the materials are wrong, but it simply means that they are allergic to some things, some materials, some aspects of a home. By creating what I see now in Japan, a dual market, that the actual end user in an apartment block is completely able to choose their own fit out, it means that every home has a different ambition, has a different budget, designed from the point of view of the actual client, the people that live there. And there is a huge boom into sustainability, health, in the interior climate in Japan because of this ability. But it still means that everybody has a different ambition. So it's much easier to have a market where you can put these things into the market because you're not designing as an interior producer for a developer that has no personal interest in the health of an actual home user, but you're directly as a business to consumer selling to the client, making a completely different budget possible and creating a hugely better health sort of health budget available for the industry, and that's a huge boom into quality.
And with that, I want to slowly wrap this session up because we're running out of time. I do have one last question for all of you, and that's what can we expect on the short term that will change in this industry? What will we see?
I'm going to, and actually Ellen mentioned this, I think she's dead right. public sector, circular public sector procurement. And definitely in the Netherlands, and I think this is going to start coming all over Europe. This is going to be quite an exciting space because companies respond to customers. This is what Remco was saying, put the user and the customer at the beginning, in the middle. And if the governments are buying, the companies will respond. So that's the big thing I think is coming up.
I absolutely agree.
Well, that's great. Thanks all of you for joining us today. I really enjoyed it. I hope everybody watching as well. If all speakers can maybe share some slides that were used today in the comment box, I think people will be interested to see, have a good look at them once more. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you everybody online for watching. This session is part of the Disruptive Innovation Festival, where 3 weeks long we are online and live and talk about a lot of different ideas and innovations that might change our future world. We are in week 3, but not everything has ended yet. There's loads and loads to catch up on, so have a look at thinkdif.go. And that's it for now.